I can't tell you how excited I am, however, for tonight's program. Jim is, as many people in the Chesapeake know, and throughout the watersheds, legendary for his work returning American shad to the Potomac River. It was really almost a single-handed feat that he pulled off. He started his work at the District of Columbia, where he started the fisheries program. Then he moved over to the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin, where he was the living resources director for most of his career. And in that capacity, he's the one that restored the fish to the river. I knew when we were working in the shad programs in schools, he was the leader of kind of doing this schools and schools program. Really wonderful work, working around the clock, trying to provide eggs and trying to help kids grow shad in the classroom, which were an important part of the public relations component of that program. Jim has gotten quite a few awards for his work. He's been the Field and Stream Conservation Hero of the Year. And also Congressman Jamie Raskin, who we know quite a bit about today, when he was Maryland Senator, gave him a Lifetime Achievement Award. So the final thing I'll say is that Jim's got a lot of chapters in his life, and one is he rode a horse from Virginia Beach to Panama City, Florida in 1973. So it's a long story on that one. We'll hear about that on a different call, but because there's too much to learn about shad on this call. So Jim, welcome. We're excited for this. Thanks for joining.
Well, thank you, Don. I'm very honored to be here. And, really, Don got in touch with me because he thought I was Jim Cummins, through some email stuff. So Jim Cummins, I have to say hi to you because it's not too often that I meet other Jim Cummingses. It's amazing how many Jim Cumminses there are. There's one in a fisheries biologist in Washington and one down in Mississippi. So it isn't as unusual a name as I thought when I was growing up. But I'm glad to be here. Whenever Eric is ready, you could start my presentation. I guess she's doing that now. Good. It's good seeing a bunch of you folks. This is a nice gathering. Again, I've entitled my talk, The Restoration of American Shad in the Potomac River, but there are lessons in my talk for other mid-Atlantic rivers. Next slide, please. Good. For those of you that aren't familiar with the American shad, it's a fish that has been around for a very long time. It's a fairly primitive fish. And its range, the American shad's range, is from Florida up the whole east coast of the United States up into Canada. Although in this time of year, almost all the shad are down in the Florida, Georgia, South Carolina area. They're starting to move north. And in the summertime, almost all the adult shad are in Canadian waters. It's a very beautiful fish. It's the world's largest herring. And it makes over the course of its life, it makes a 12,000-mile journey. But, wintering in Florida and taking the summer up in Canada, I think that they got a pretty good strategy going on. And I've also, on that map, you'll see the Chesapeake Bay drainage. And I am going to try to go through this without any comments, but if there's some burning thing you want to ask me about stuff, just please chime in and I'll try to answer it. But I'm looking forward to discussions at the end of the talk. Next slide, please. There's a bit of a delay. We didn't have this the other night when we rehearsed this. I see a hand up there. Not sure whose hand that is. Maybe Erica's. Oh, we're back. Hi, Erica. Are you having problems? Well, the next slide is going to be one of showing the Chesapeake Bay drainage, and I worked on the Potomac and a map of the Potomac, and I want to include that. This looks like we're getting to it. Now, this map of the Potomac drainage, you see it superimposed up there on the left to the Chesapeake Bay drainage. But the thing I want to show you on this map, tons I can show you, but the one I want to call your attention to is that sort of highlighted blue line that's just upstream from Washington, D.C., because the Potomac's kind of an unusual river on the East Coast in that almost the entire shad range within the river is tidal. The only free-flowing freshwater part of it is that blue highlighted area from pretty much from the western border of DC up about 10 miles to Great Falls, the natural boundary to the fish. So it's spent, and then this freshwater tidal spawning habitat goes about 20 miles downstream from DC, around that little bend that you see down there is about the southern range of its spawning. But that's real different than a lot of the rivers where, like in the Susquehanna, which you see on that map, I mean, Shad used to go on up into New York and the Susquehanna, and the Delaware, they go way up. The James River, they go west of I-81, you know, when before there were dams and other obstacles to their path. But the Potomac's unusual. All right, next slide, please. See how this goes. Yay. And shad are very important to the ecosystem. When we're restoring shad, we're really restoring food for a lot of creatures. I kind of like to start with the dolphins up to the right, because that's one of the primary foods of dolphin. In fact, the shad is the only fish yet documented that can hear the echolocation sounds of the dolphin, which they evolved to do to avoid being eaten by them. But when you have this real low levels of shad that we have coastwide, the dolphins are hurting. They need food. Eagles are laying their eggs right now. You know, if you look on an eagle cam anywhere, you'll see the eagles are laying their eggs now in the snow. It is, by the way, it is snowing out my window right now. And they lay them in February so that they hatch to time with the, you know, the arrival of the migratory fish in, you know, in the coastal area, and then inland it's more of other fishes. But for the biggest area of eagles are really down the coastal areas, and they're timing to take advantage of shad and other migratory fish. Going around real quick, down below you see cod. Like, what is the cod and shad linkage? Well, Spencer Baird, who started the U.S. Fish Commission in 1877, in his 1886 journal talks about the demise of cod, and the reason the cod were doing so poorly, says because their primary food, and this is really forgotten, their primary food, he said, was shad and herring, and both of those species had already started to decline along the coast. In fact, that's one of the 3 reasons the U.S. Fish Commission was created, was to document all of the fisheries resources, freshwater and saltwater in the United States. 2 is, why are the American shad doing so badly? And 3, why are the cod doing so badly? So that wasn't just a little task, that was a primary task. And the cod and the shad and the herring were doing poorly because of dam building. This is 1877, so it's pre-electric. He's talking about the canal dams, that when they were building all the canals, they were damming rivers to supply water. It was blocking off, in the case of the shad, the main stem rivers. Herring had been hit since colonial times with mills. And you see other fish, but and critters. Won't go into those right now. Well, I will mention one more. Anybody know what I can't take too many questions. It's going to get too complicated. The major predator of shad in the rivers is the one in the center, that little minnow in the center, because minnows, they eat their eggs and larvae. So when the shad come in to spawn, their strategy is to come in big masses, spawn a whole bunch, because they don't build nests or protect the young. And they're basically banking on overwhelming the minnows from eating their eggs and larvae. So when their numbers are really low, when we get shad numbers really low, that's hard for them to do. And that's why it's hard to get them to rebound. One of the main reasons that it's hard to get them to rebound. Next slide, please. Oh, there we all are again. It's good seeing everyone. I guess Erica will, I don't know what the problem is with we practiced this yesterday, but sorry, Erica, don't get nervous. We'll get it.
Yeah, so what's happening, Jim, is we'll get through this. Erica, while she's sharing the slide, she's also letting people in, because they're trying to keep hackers out, because they've had a hacker in the past, which we don't want.
I'm not going to turn me into a kitten. Oh. You're going to turn me into a kitten, huh? I'll be a talking cat here shortly.
So we'll go back and forth a little bit, letting people in. People are piling in to hear you, Jim. Go ahead. Great.
Well, that's great. I'm glad that they're there. This is a slide showing, again, that the shad is a fish steeped in history of the Americas, really. Up near Great Falls, up in the upper left, you'll see a petroglyph carving in a rock at Great Falls, I mentioned earlier, and that represents a fish. It's very similar to the fish carvings on the cliffs in Spain, by the way, incidentally. And then over to the right, I show Indian fishing methods. Now, these are photographs, these are Edward Curtis's photographs of Washington State, what's now Washington State Indians. But the way they fished was very similar to the ways that the Native Americans would have fished in the upper parts of the river here. Down below them, you'll see some dip netters up at Great Falls. Again, you can see why it's the natural barrier to shad migration, because you have a fall of about 20 feet in some places, so it prevents them from getting over. And they used to dip net shad up there at Great Falls in the early 1900s. And on the far left, there is an old painting, 1801, showing shad anglers up at Great Falls. They also caught striped bass up there. And I'm going to talk about that middle one. It's kind of too small. I'll get to that in a little bit later. Next slide, please. Again, Native American fishing methods. On the left side of this image, you see mainly the bay kinds of fisheries collections, spearing. Also, they had what I call their type of pound nets. But on the right are the river types of fishing, where they would build these weirs, these rock and wood weirs that would force the fish into a concentrated area where they would harvest them. You see one of those weirs down below with a satellite image looking down at the Potomac River near Brunswick, Maryland. Brunswick, Maryland used to be called Eeltown back in pioneer days because of all the fish weirs in that location, and the Indians were harvesting. And the American eel was their main fish that they collected in those weirs upstream from Great Falls. By the way, American eel was the largest freshwater predatory fish in the river, native fish. All the others that are in there now have been introduced. Okay, next slide, please. And this one is, I'm showing us a weir that's in that portion of the river that little section that the shad did have access to. And you see this is a satellite image looking down at Potomac, which is flowing up to the left, to the upper left. The Virginia, that white line to the upper right is the state line of Virginia. Maryland is owner of the Potomac. But just to give you I like this slide because it caught this plane that's heading towards National Airport in the image. But you see that weir in the bottom center, you'll see a V shape there, pretty obvious. And that's for collection of fish moving downstream. But if you follow that rock wall, that white line that you see, and follow it to the left bottom corner, you'll see there's a V there as well. That's a V that's facing upstream. So that had to have been there to capture shad moving upstream. And they also, the shad would out-migrate. They don't die from spawning, so they're out-migrating. So this is kind of a double whammy kind of setup for them. But you can see the size of it. It was, but they were managed by a pretty large population, and usually there's a population, village nearby. Unfortunately, with the Potomac, the nearby for Maryland, well, it's not unfortunate because I love the C&O Canal. 183 miles of protected riverfront on the Maryland side. But in the construction of that canal in the 1800s, they pretty much moved material. So it's hard to know, the archaeology of that area has been compromised by that. But anyway, next slide, please. They weren't only important to the early Americans, they were important to the early English colonists that came here, the new Americans. George Washington had a fishery at Mount Vernon, and that fishery actually kept it viable. He would have gone bankrupt if he hadn't had that fishery. And that shad was the main fish that they caught. And in 1778, for those of you up in Delaware in the Brandywine and the Schuylkill River, the Valley Forge, the troops at Valley Forge did eat shad, but they really ate shad that were brought in by wagons, and most of those shad came from the Potomac. And that's, again, you can read about that in the Valley Forge Fish Story by Joseph Lee Boyle, if you get a chance on that. But they were important to early America. Next slide, please. And here's some of as the population grew, the technology and time came along, technology grew as well. I forgot to mention something about the shad arrival in the spring for the earliest people that lived here onward was very important because your larders, your food that you harvested the year before are out when basically, March, April, May, you're running out. You've either run out or you're really close to running out of food. So the arrival of shad provided immense amount of food for you that was, greatly celebrated by the Native Americans and these early Americans and our grandparents and great-grandparents when they came. That were its species name Alosa sapidisma. Alosa means it's a herring. Sapidisma, sapid, it means savory or delicious. So it's a delicious fish. It's kind of tough on an animal when you're named delicious. But this is a cartoon drawn in 1996 in the Washington Post, and it's depicting a shad fishery down below Mount Vernon, a couple miles. And it shows the technology of that time where they had fairly large nets and they deployed them, and then they would pull the nets up with horses. And this Chapman fishery is particularly interesting because Charles Chapman, the owner, kept an 11-year record of what he caught. So we have, that's in the early 1800s, 1811 to 1820, 1810 to 1821. It's an important look at what was harvested at that fishery at the time. And it was the shad were the main money-making fish of the Chesapeake Bay up until about the 1900s. They made more money than striped bass, crabs, oysters, and all that. The shad was the real moneymaker. And that's, sort of forgotten in time. Next slide, please. Hello again, everybody. And I like this history because I think, again, in order to restore something, you really need to know what it was like. And we're certainly not going to get back to the colonial conditions. But if we have an understanding of what's there, we know what potential we have. And,
Jim, thanks. Yeah, she was just letting more people in. So we're back in the program.
I'm glad more people are here.
Yep. Piled in on you.
These are some images of shad fishing in the Potomac. Up at the upper right is the shad fishery in the Washington, D.C., up in the Anacostia River. That's those buildings in the back with the red roofs. That's the Navy Yard. And you see, again, that kind of technology where they're using draft horses to pull up these big nets. Down below is a little bit, when the age of photography came in, there were some nice photographs taken by the U.S. Fish Commission. They're now under NOAA. And that shows a steam-driven winch that would pull in even bigger nets. You see over on the bottom left, the harvested shad getting ready to be processed, and another set of netters up there. Next slide. This is a shad boat. Kind of interesting. You had 24 oarsmen, and then you see that open area in the back, and is where the net was kept and deployed. And then they had a lantern in there to mark them because there were ships moving around. You had to keep it lit, not so much for seeing things. They relied on, back in those days, people didn't have flashlights and all that. They were good at seeing in the dark. A little bit of light would help out, but that was mainly to mark the boats. But what you might have noticed in the earlier picture and in this one is almost all the watermen are black. 99% of the watermen until about the 1870s from Delaware south were black. So there's a lot of black history involved with shad history. They were the ones working the river. Next slide, please. I do give a talk on this American shad and black history. It's really, I'm trying to think of how to summarize it. It's a long talk. But they were basically they knew all the rivers. For instance, they knew all the rivers very well. They were often, they were slaves or freemen that were moved up and down the river, rented out, so to speak, and they became familiar with the river. So they did things like between plantation communication, which was kept real quiet. They would go up and say, okay, I saw your aunt or your mom or whatever, and they'd communicate like that. Those guys knew the river. So during the Civil War, for instance, they were incorporated by the U.S. Navy right away. They were Navy, black Navy men before we had blacks in the Army, because they knew the rivers and they were very important in that early area. But I'm going on to another talk. Next slide, please. Just for the Delaware folks, I included this image. It's a painting, and you'll see similarly up in Delaware and the Delaware River, the watermen were black in that area. Next slide, please. I'll reserve that for perhaps another discussion. The processing of shad, it was a kind of a big deal. Here you see a smokehouse where on the bottom right, they brought the shad in, they're salting them, and they're stringing them up, handing them up to these guys that carry them up on these racks and put them up there and then smoke them. On the left, you see them taking them down, and they're putting them in barrels and salted, and then again in barrels to be to be sent out to different areas. So that's quite a smoker. You know, there are about 1,500 fish in that one dimensional layer. I don't know how deep that building was or not, but if it was 30 feet long, they're smoking 45,000 shad. That's a good smoker. Next slide, please. And the American shad was so abundant. Again, I mentioned Spencer Baird earlier. He was not only the first director of the U.S. Fish Commission, he was also the first director of the Smithsonian. But he said in one of his reports that there's no better illustration of the number in which migratory fish enter rivers than can be given as it relates to the Potomac River in the short distance from its mouth to Great Falls in Potomac, only 12 miles above Washington. An estimated 22.5 million shad, 110 million pounds were harvested from the Potomac River in 1832. And he also notes that approximately 995,000, I round off to 1 million barrels of salt were used to cure that many shad. All right, 1 barrel of salt though can prepare 4 barrels of shad. You don't use, not putting in just a 1 barrel of salt. So that many barrels, just being conservative, it was about 4 million barrels. So, but 1 million barrels would make a pyramid. If it was the size of football, it would be up a football field from end zones included. It would be up, a pyramid would be up 300 feet. However, next slide, please.
And I think, oops.
I found this picture of a stack of barrels that were being burnt for a 4th of July celebration in Salem, Massachusetts back in the 1950s, which obviously wasn't a good era for barrels. But it was the picture said it's 100 foot tall. I estimate the base to be 25 feet tall. Well, if we were to stack those barrels I mentioned, those 4 million barrels, that would make a stack 15 times taller than that, 20 times wider, and 60 times longer. And I describe this to you because I'm trying to get you to understand how many people were employed. It wasn't just fishermen collecting the fish or people processing the fish. You had coopers, woodmen, people going out harvesting the trees, blacksmiths, just a whole set of people involved in this industry. And according to the annual reports of the C&O Canal, salted fish, what they used, which was again predominantly shad, was the #1 product in dollars going upstream on the C&O Canal. Next slide, please. Excuse me for my cough. Shad are delicious, and one of the ways of preparing them is planking them. It's pretty popular. And up at the upper right, you see a planking that took place at Marshall Hall in Maryland in 1893. Planking, as it sounds, they basically take a plank of wood, usually oak, which is dampened and heated up, and then you attach the cleaved shad to those planks to sort of bake them. They're not really smoked; they're baked, and there's various things are added to that to help with the taste. But I included these pictures that I came upon. These are pictures of the DC bar assembled at Marshall Hall for the annual shad plankings. One's 1916 and one's 1924. I know it's quite a diverse group of individuals there, but just look how many lawyers are gathered for shad. It was quite a delicious fish. Next slide, please. And, to meet the demand, technology improved. This is a picture of the largest seine in the world, deployed close to that Chapman fishery that I showed earlier. This net is actually 32,000 feet long. So it's about 6 miles long. And they caught 5,000 shad in one haul. And, basically, not surprisingly, with gear technology improving like that and harvest really going up, the shad started to disappear. Next slide, please. And here you've got a number of, this doesn't reflect that 1830s that I was saying, but our first sort of continual record are shad landings, which went from a high of 4 million pounds on this particular date down until their decline, and the fishery was closed in 1982. Those 64 to 2004 landings are from the Potomac River Fisheries Commission, which again started in 1964. So they have that data. But it was precipitous decline, really, and it was closed in the Potomac. When I started working on trying to restore it. Next slide, please. But keep in mind, like other rivers up and down the East Coast, the demise of shad isn't just from overfishing. There are three major reasons that almost all rivers fit in. Those gear improvements, and overfishing was one, but pollution was also just as bad. The rivers were in such bad shape in the 60s, 50s, 60s, 70s. It was just awful, hard for them to come in. And again, loss of spawning habitat, and that's primary because the dams blocked their spawning habitat. I mentioned the canal dams started it, but the hydroelectric dams, water supply dams later on, and all that also contributed to the loss of habitat. That's the main loss of habitat. Next slide, please. Hello, everyone. Let's see if anybody's new. I guess there's other people. I can't see everybody. I'm looking over.
Yes, anytime you see that, we're letting more people in. Go ahead, Jim.
That's good. I'm glad. Yeah, welcome to the new folks. I'm talking about the shad and why they had problems. And overfishing was one, but pollution was another. Potomac's one of the rivers in the nation that's sort of notable for its pollution. And there were huge fish kills. And that reputation occurred because lots of international visitors coming to the nation's capital. And then the springtime, you had these big runs of fish coming up. There was basically no oxygen in the water, and they had these big fish kills, and they just sat on the banks and stunk. It was nasty. This is the picture of Mount Vernon, or the dock in Mount Vernon back then. You weren't allowed, told not even to touch the river, did not even contact the river. But George Washington was a great lover of the Potomac, and that just breaks my heart. I know if his spirit seeing that sign up there would have shocked him and other of our founders. I'm glad, and thankfully that's no longer there. It's again, most of the time you can swim there. You want to avoid it after a storm, but most of the time there's plenty of fishing and swimming in that area. Next slide, please. And the third one again was dams. And for the Potomac, it's this set of dams that I show in this picture that's just about a mile and a half upstream of DC. I say these dams because there's really what I call 2.5 dams. The curved line to the bottom right is the dam that George Washington's Potomac Company built in the 1700s. And then it was extended all the way across the river when they did the C&O Canal Dam in the 1820s. They needed more water all the way across. And it's a sort of straight line that's in the middle of the upper dam, which is really about 10 feet high. It doesn't look into this because of the perspective, but it's about a 10-foot high dam that runs all the way from Virginia on the left to the Maryland shoreline on the right. And that's a pump station that pumps water up. It was built to make sure that when water is withdrawn drinking water is withdrawn for the Washington area, they don't drink the water dry from Great Falls, where most of the intakes are, down here to Little Falls. And that was put in. But so there was sort of a stepwise effect on shad migrations. The Potomac Canal Dam didn't really do anything. The C&O Canal when it was built, was a rock rubble dam, just piled up rocks, and it was kind of porous, so fish did get through. In 1940, when the federal government got the lands that later became the C&O Canal National Park, and they own those dams, those people back then in the 40s thought that we better preserve that old dam, so they poured concrete over the top of the old historic dam, and that stopped fish from going up there entirely. And then that dam that's upstream of that 10-foot dam called the Brookmont Dam at Little Falls, also in the 60s, further stopped the fish. Next, on the bottom left, you'll see that same area of the river during the drought period in 2001. And if you look real close on that far left bottom picture, you'll see a channel in the river, and that's where the shad run. They put a fishway in this dam when they built it in the 60s. You'll see it in the middle, in the little island in the middle called Snake Island. And you see it opening little doors there. That was a fishway they installed. The Corps of Engineers, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers built this, but that fishway never passed a fish. John Gottschalk, who was head of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service back then, wanted the fishway to go on the Virginia shore, but it was cheaper for them to do it there, so they did it there. Of course, it didn't work. It was hard to work with. So again, the new fishway that I'm going to talk about was put over here on that Virginia shoreline. Next slide, please.
And Jim, she's taking a pause. There's more people coming in. So
Okay.
one second. Keep talking if that's okay.
Good. And I'm looking at other newer folks that might be here. I've seen a few folks that I know, and it's nice to see you all. So this is when the fishway was being constructed at Little Falls. Took a picture because it's real close to the Virginia shoreline. I'm actually standing on the Virginia shoreline, and you see they cut a notch in the dam. It's about a 10-foot high dam, but none of the fish in the Chesapeake Bay, migratory fish, will jump over anything. So we cut a notch, and then these W-shaped weirs were a new design that slowed the water down, because once you cut a notch, actually that increases the flow through that notch. So you got to be able to get to the fish's swimming speeds, burst swimming speeds. So those W-shaped weirs are there to slow down the water enough so that fish can swim up. And that fishway isn't just a shad fishway. That's a fishway that would work on just almost every fish that's in that part of the river, including shad. Next slide, please. It was a new design. It became this little page on the bottom left, the Fish Passage Technology and American Fisheries Society publication. It became this is the new design. And so some of you that have lower head dams, this was again 10, 15 feet high, you could consider doing this if you need to keep the dam, because that dam, the Brookmont Dam, is a water supply dam. It's it's still a much needed dam. We couldn't interfere with its function. So this small notch with these weirs it works well. And we've had no problems with it since it was finally constructed in 2000. And Charlie Steck, thank Senator Sarbanes for yourself and Senator Sarbanes for helping to get this thing funded along with other folks. But Senator Sarbanes was very helpful in getting this thing funded. It's a unique situation. The District of Columbia really owns that dam. The Corps of Engineers built it for the district. It's in Maryland waters, and it abuts the Virginia shoreline. So and funding for it had to go to the DC budget. It isn't part of the normal federal Corps of Engineers budgets. So it was a tricky little thing to finally get funded. Next slide, please. As they all can be. But building getting a fishway in a dam isn't all you need. You need to restore fish back up to the waters where the chemistry of that upstream water would, re-imprint those fish. So in 1995, we started working on a project that would both restore shad and imprint the fry to these upstream waters so that they no longer they hadn't been able to access for so long. But I knew how to fish. I could have been a typical biologist, go out and say, I'm just going to do the sampling myself. But I knew the best bet is really to get somebody that can help you, that knows a little bit more, has a history there. So I asked A.C. Carpenter, who was the director of the Potomac River Fisheries Commission that manages the fisheries down. I said, any good watermen down there that will be able to help me out? Next slide, please. And I actually had seen Lewis Harley, the last working waterman of the upper Potomac at that time, Fairfax County waterman. And he used to fish for shad with his dad when he was younger. Again, it had been closed since '83. So he was not that young when it closed, but he knew the river and where to go. And I really have a great debt of gratitude to him. He's a wonderful man. We became best friends. He passed away of cancer in 2009, but I continue to work with his sons, Brad and Mike, because the shad, next slide, please. I'm going ahead of myself a little bit. And not only did I get good help from a waterman and knowledge of experienced watermen, but I was lucky enough to advertise and get a lot of volunteers to come out, hundreds of them over the course. They came out on, it's springtime. The shad spawn at dusk, or you come out right at dusk and fish into night. Often, sometimes you don't get off the river until 1 a.m. And the volunteers helped out. Next slide, please. And here I'm stripping the eggs of a shad and getting them ready to, fertilize them with the milk of the males. And by the way, that young man's picture was taken by Dave Harp, as well as that earlier picture. I forgot to credit on these pictures that Dave Harp was the photographer on that from the Chesapeake Bay Foundation. So I don't know if he's on with us now or not, but Dave, thank you. I like those pictures. Next slide, please. So after the evening squeezins, and you put the eggs in a box, big boxes with oxygen, just as you sort of transport a tropical fish from a fish store. But we take these big boxes containing about 4 liters of eggs in each box down to the Harrison Lake National Fish Hatchery, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Harrison Lake Hatchery. And here you see Dave Peterson. He's pouring some of the eggs we collected into that hatchery jar, where they stay in that upper jar for about a week. It takes them about 4 or 5 days before they hatch. They go from a recently fertilized eggs to a free swimming fish, 5 days. And then they then swim out and go into those larger tanks. Next slide, please. Then those larger tanks are loaded onto a truck, driven up to Great Falls. It's a difficult place to access. We found there's a small emergency rescue area where the fry, and they're being stocked. Well, actually, they're checking the temperature. They're stocked with pipes right there at this Mather Gorge part of Great Falls. We can't go right up to the base of the falls. There's no access up there, but this is only about a mile downstream from the falls. So from 1995 until 2002, we did the restoration stocking of the Potomac. We stocked 17 million shad fry, and at 2002, our job was done as far as our restoration stocking. But then the Potomac went to the source of eggs for Maryland's rivers, for the Rappahannock River in Virginia, for the Susquehanna River, and even for the Delaware River. So there was from 2002 onward until COVID really, there was a group of other folks out collecting shad, but the waterman Lewis Harley and I didn't want to just let people come, because when you collect these shad, they die from being collected. You can't squeeze their eggs and let them go. They die. So they're being sacrificed. So all the fish that are collected for these other rivers, the adult fish die. So we said, well, for the restoration stockings, you should be putting back roughly estimate 10% of what your hatchery is producing that year, put 10% back in the Potomac to replace the adult shad that you sacrificed to get the eggs for these other rivers. So that's still been going on. So the Potomac's actually been stocked since 95. Again, there was 8 years of restoration stocking, and then the other years are what we call this replacement stocking. Next slide, please. I gotta get something, okay. I had to get something to drink. I'm real happy to have helped start a program involving young people in the Washington area, the Maryland, Virginia suburbs, and Washington, D.C. Tens of thousands of students went through this program where we would go out and collect the shad. Some of them come out with us when we're collecting, but all the schools, Dave Peterson, who I showed his picture earlier at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Harrison Lake Hatchery, he developed on that sort of center right, you'll see some people looking into a blue bucket. That's the shad, little miniaturized shad tank. The hatchery jar is that thing that you see, a tube with a couple little red clamps holding it. That's where the eggs, about 4,000 eggs go into that little tube, and then the schools have them. We deliver them to the schools Monday morning, and then by Friday they've hatched and they go down to the river to stock them. You see these students stocking their fry. It's been a really good program. Next slide, please. It's still going on. Although we didn't do it this last year, 2020 was the first year we haven't done it since 1996 because of the COVID stuff. And I'll talk about that. These are, for instance, these are the numbers of schools that participated in just 1 year. It grew from 3 schools to 83 schools in the Washington area. So that's how we reach so many. And when you're reaching these students, and they range from kindergarten to high school. In fact, one of the first 3 schools that started the program was Sidwell Friends School in Washington, D.C., 40 grand a year to send your kid there. And the seniors at Sidwell Friends do the shad hatching, and they study the developmental biology of that 5-day period, what happens in each day, and they look at it. But most of the kids, the best grade probably is around 5th or 6th grade, but they're involved. Next slide, please. It's good to have them involved. So what's happened to the shad population? Next slide, please. Well, it depends on who's answering. In 2020, the ASMFC, the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, put out their new assessment of the American shad, coastwide assessment. And they said in there that adult mortality was determined to be unsustainable for three stocks in Connecticut, the Delaware, and the Potomac. I'm scratching my head over that. I looked at their data. I don't believe their data. Let's see what the fish have to say. Next slide, please. Okay, these are the, after we built the, after the fishway was completed at Little Falls in 2000, Dave Odom with U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and I would make trips up to Great Falls. We tried a couple different techniques from electrofishing to gill netting. We actually came up with this using a dip net from the shore was our best method. And we started collecting shad with increasing numbers. We're only able to do that for 3 years before the Fish and Wildlife Service had budget cuts and we had to curtail that. But you see how just in our sampling, pretty much the same amount of effort, we saw a significant increase. One of the other little footnotes is that rock that Dave is standing on is the same rock that I showed you that picture of those fishermen in the early 1900s dipping shad. So we rediscovered, they say that's shad rock, but we rediscovered shad rock. So we were glad to do that. Next slide, please. So we had to curtail it, but the visitation at Great Falls Park is one of the most visited parks in the country. It's a very beautiful place. And all the people on the shore were asking the Park Service, what are these fish I'm seeing down there? So they put a kiosk down, so they have to keep explaining it to everybody. And they've shown the shad that are up there. Shad are making it up there in good numbers. Next slide, please. This is a graph of the adult numbers captured by Maryland DNR, adult shad captured when they're doing their striped bass surveys, which started in 1996. Each state along the coast was required to do a striped bass survey, look at the adult striped bass. Maryland, to their wisdom, also kept track of the adult shad they captured. I like this data because it's very experimental. It's not a fisheries dependent set of data. It's, done for the purpose of just collecting these fish. And you see the shad numbers from 1996. We started again stocking in 95. The Little Falls Fishway was installed in 2000. And you see, it bounces around. That's what happens with these fish. But I don't see them declining. And actually, in my image, I don't see, I've got 3 or 4 people on the left here. In 2020 was 2019 was one of the best years, and 2020 was the 4th best year. So it's still doing very well. This is again the adult numbers. Next slide, please. These are the young of the year. And again, I don't know if you all can't see the last couple of years, but we've continued to increase. When I started work in, which in my picture, I can't quite see all the dates, but you see this program stocking initiated, that's 1995. And I was looking back at that time at the data from the 70s going, oh, if we can only get back to the 70s, it would be so much, that's the best year for the young of the year from that data set going back to 1959. But, since, 18 of the last 21 years, we've exceeded that record of the 70s. And it's gone up, on what you can't see the last couple of years to the right, they've also were really great years. Next slide, please. So the fish seem to be saying something different than the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission. This is the commercial harvest of shad. Back on the left, you see the numbers of fish that they used to harvest in the pounds of fish per net in different years. And I'm sorry you're not seeing the years below. That's in the 1950s. And then the PRFC had total catch, that little red line you see near the bottom. That's about in the 1970s, and then the fishery closed in 83, and then it was started up again. But it's been increasing now. On this one, you can see the most recent data, and it's gone up. You see that it's an increase. Again, it kind of moves around a bit, but it's an increasing line. Next slide, please. And that blue line that you see running across, that's the threshold, the legal threshold to where the fishery could be reopened. So in 2012, the fishery was reopened. It's remained open since then. So again, the commercial fishing is there on the Potomac. In the springtime, you could go into stores and actually, you could be buying a Potomac origin shad. And I'm glad to have that back to that level. But we haven't seen a real impact with the watermen. Next slide, please. And the other good news is there's lots of anglers that are coming up there, especially around Fletcher's Boathouse in Washington, D.C. This is from a 2004 Washington Post article. It's only gotten, there's just so many people fishing there in the springtime now. It's a catch and release. There's no recreational harvest. And the people are very sensitive to releasing the fish without, even most of them don't take them out of the water at all. They keep them in the water. They're doing real well, and that's become an exciting event every spring again. Next slide, please. We have plankies. I've done a planking at Fletcher's. There you see me up at the top center with Lewis Harley. We continue to plank for various events in the springtime. On the upper right, that's my smoker at home. I like smoked shad. You've got below that, the Virginia shad plankings that are steeped with some of the politics. The very bottom right is the Vienna, Maryland shad planking, and then in the center bottom is the Catskill River shad planking and the Lambertville, New Jersey shad planking. So there's still shad planking going on, and I'm glad because they taste good and it keeps people aware of them. If they don't, it makes people appreciate the fish. Next slide, please. I like to see them reopening. But the story of the shad restoration is not a short one. It's a long one. You can't read all of this, but the Potomac shad population will never fully recover. It's doing really well. So noted as being one of the best, in the numbers in the whole East Coast. But it will never fully recover until the shad have recovered up and down the coast, because shad spend most of their lives out in the ocean, where they're food for a lot of fish and dolphin and other things that are eating them. So if the shad are basically the only fish that's out there, they're getting very preyed upon. When they used to have big populations from other rivers, they're the shad weren't as heavily preyed upon. Another factor that's important is the management of some of the fisheries up in New England. I'm not very happy with that, especially what they call the river, it's the lobster bait fishery, which is going for the Atlantic herring. The Atlantic herring doesn't really go into the rivers to spawn. It spawns along the coast, and they are allowed to harvest Atlantic herring for the lobster bait industry. But the big boats that go out, you've seen, the helicopters look at these big schools of silvery fish. They round them up with these big nets. They suck all of these herring with a 3-foot diameter vacuum hose onto the ships, chop them up, and make them into lobster bait. They're made into lobster bait because in order to have enough lobsters to feed every lobster house across the country and everywhere else, they've got to artificially increase the amount of food available to lobsters. So they're basically harvesting this food, putting it in their lobster traps, which is an in situ way of raising these extra lobsters, because the lobsters are going to the trap and eat this herring. But when they're too small to harvest, they're let go. But they basically it's a daily thing. They go into the trap, eat the bait. If they're too small, they're released until they're large enough to keep. And unfortunately, if it was all Atlantic herring, I wouldn't be too upset. But there was a lot of evidence back in the 90s that fishery was harvesting, because they're just looking at silvery herring-looking fish, and there was pretty good evidence they were impacting shad populations pretty badly. And unfortunately, ASMFC never really took any stringent measures against that fishery, and that's still going on. So I think that's a factor in why a lot of fisheries are having. I think that ASMFC actually was getting back at me a little bit for my objections on this recent, their declaration that the Potomac shad is getting overfished. I don't, and they're saying, well, this multi-state collection of fish for broodstock is what's overfishing it. I'm sorry, I just don't believe that. Next slide, please. I'll try to go through these last pretty quickly to run out of time. Again, we've had a lot of the kids involved, and they're basically helping still with their stocking with this replacement stocking. Next slide. I can kind of just go over these other mentioned. Nice book that was written about it. It got the Isaac Walton Book Conservation Book of the Year. It's the Green Earth Book of the Year. It's still used widely. And if any of you are interested in doing a Shad project, it's a great resource book. Next slide. I've been recognized a number of ways. I won't go into all of those. Next slide. I'm going to focus on one. That's Gail Norton, who is the Secretary of Interior, came out to give me an award. It's one of those glass awards. You don't see it, but she came down to the river to give it to me. And then I like it that the American Fisheries Sports Fishing Association gave me the Future of Fishing Award, and I was there with John Dingle. Very proud to be standing next to that gentleman who's done a lot of conservation things. Next slide, please. He's passed away. But my favorite recently, of course, is I was given an award in 2019, in the spring of 2019, by Jamie Raskin. He's presented me with a Lifetime Achievement Award, which I feel a lot prouder than what he's doing right recently with the impeachment hearing. So next slide, please. I'll let it close at that. I couldn't help but interject that one. I'm very proud that on the Anacostia, there's this mural of art, sort of a Japanese art with the shad jumping. They don't really jump, but artists, you got to give them some license. Next slide, please. And I'm particularly proud that the District of Columbia in 2017 made the American shad their state fish. So the American shad's the state fish of the District of Columbia. Next slide, please. But those are my I'm sorry I went a little long, I guess, with some of those interruptions. But the take-home lessons are river restoration's work. In our case, the modification of the dam to permit fish passage. Public involvement's very important. Getting them involved, and you get public support. This is important for anybody working on a river right now for shad. When possible, try to restore that fish passage in increments. I think one of the reasons the Potomac did well was because they only had a little short piece of river we opened up. When you have the really big pieces, it sort of thins out the shad, and I think also increases the number of minnow predation on the river. So don't try to open it up if you can. If there's a series of dams, try to open them one at a time over time and let them rest up a little bit. Aquatic vegetation is very important. And then again, you got to have patience. I started working on getting that dam modified in 1985, and it was 2000 before it was modified. So please have patience. All right, now I'm ready for questions. There was one that popped up. I saw a chat pop up.
Yeah, so Jim, maybe what I could do, Jim, if that's okay, I'll kind of field the questions. If that's, then I'll just send them your way. Sure. But first of all, huge congratulations. I mean, what a momentous, wonderful thing you've done for the Potomac and for, yeah, exactly.
Well, just me, there's a lot of people, but thank you.
And you've really brought out, the Hollywood squares here. I mean, you've got, David Keller, who's the head fisheries scientist at the Philadelphia Academy of Natural Sciences. You've got John Jackson, the senior scientist at the Shad Water Research Center. You've got Maggie McCann, who owns one of the dams, or the candidate she runs the Parks Department, owns the dam. She's trying to get shad around that. You've got the Hagley Museum, Tanya Looney, who owns 4 dams on the Brandywine. You've got Jerry Kaufman, who's kind of led the Brandywine Shad 2020 effort, and the scientists behind that. So you've also got Steve Meserve, who's the last commercial fisherman of the Delaware River, the very last one.
Steve.
And, yeah, so I actually wanted to ask Steve. Steve, please, if you want to take yourself off mute and ask a question, make a comment, please do, and then we'll go to the questions in the chat box.
Hey, Don.
Yeah, Steve, so please, any questions or comments you want to make about the presentation, I'd love to hear from you.
He's thinking.
I'm good. No.
Okay.
Well, I have a great appreciation for watermen just in general. I mean, I have some family history there too, heritage, but Lewis Harley and working with his sons has been a highlight of my life, really. So enjoyed work. Anybody, any questions? Sorry to digress a little bit on that.
Yeah. Well, Steve, thank you. And Steve fishes. His family's been fishing over 100 years, and it's his data that they're using now for the population of the Delaware River. Really fascinating. So thanks, Steve. Hey, what I'd like to do, if that's okay, is cherry pick a little bit questions. And Rick Stuckey, it's a really important question for the Brandywine. If you could ask that, all the questions are important ones, but I know that some of these are might end up in more shad in the river. And so, Rick, if you want to ask your question.
Oh, sure. And I see that Jim asked a similar question. So one was the fishway that you showed there, Jim, was that a denial fishway? Like what do you call that? And what percentage of the shad actually made their way through that compared to, did 100% make it or 50%?
That's a very good question. That's often a criteria. With that particular fishway, and it's about a 32-foot wide slot cut about 4 feet deep with those weirs in it. We considered various ways that we could monitor that, because sometimes if there's a fish passage like at Conowingo where they go up through a window and they can count and get those kinds of numbers. In our case, it's kind of a cut in the river and you can't count it very well. And in the springtime when the shad are moving, they especially move whenever there's a freshet. When the river's high, you'll get a new group of shad moving upriver. And springtime flows are usually pretty high anyway, and they're also very turbid. So you can't sit there with a mask and float around in springtime temperatures and try to count these fish. And that's a dangerous area too. There were, in 1985, there were 5 Army guys that died at that dam with a raft. So it's a dangerous area. We have to be cognizant of that. And we tried thinking about putting cameras in there, but nothing works. So there's no real monitoring of what's going through that dam and what's right below it. It's just too difficult to do. Nobody's come up with a way of assessing that. So we had that assessment of how many were making it upstream, which again was cut off because of funding constraints. But we know there's a lot of fish going up there. I guess that's the bottom line. The one that counts the most is there's a lot of fish going up there.
Okay, and then the second question, can you talk about where you got your funding from? And Jim Shanahan asked a similar question, which was, how much did you raise over the years and what were the major sources?
Good question. At first, there was, we had some federal funding kind of lined up, and there was a non-federal match for mitigation of a large embayment just south of the District of Columbia called the Port America Project at that time. And they, as part of their permit to do the development they were doing on that embayment, they planned to do on that embayment. They would put up $500,000 to help fund the fishway, which was estimated at costing about $2 million to do that notch. That's a long story. But that went under in the 90s. There was a recession in the 90s. And it wasn't until actually that cove is now a fully developed cove. It's often featured on the local news around Washington, D.C., Washington Harbor. It's got a big Ferris wheel, but that happened after we had the fishway. So we when that thing tanked, when that first proposed development tanked, we didn't have any funding. But in 1996, there was a large oil spill, a pipeline, the Colonial Pipeline, 3-foot diameter pipe from Texas to New York burst and spilled 500,000 gallons of diesel fuel into the Potomac. And mitigation for that was included, and the District of Columbia's mitigation was the non-federal match used to match the $1.5 million that was earmarked for the Corps of Engineers. So that's how that was paid for. I want to go on a long story though, because the Corps of Engineers, they said, well, in order to put that fishway on the Virginia side, when that dam was built in the 60s, there's federal access on both sides of the river. There's a C&O Canal on the Maryland shoreline. There's a road going down to the Virginia shoreline, and we built that fishway right next to the Virginia shore. But some well-placed people live on that Virginia shore. And when we requested that the Corps use that as their access area, about 2 months later, when we wrote an official letter requesting that be done, 2 months later, their law side of the Corps of Engineers said, we are not pursuing access on the Virginia shore at this time. So all of the money, there's a lot of money in that estimate that went into building a parking lot on the Claire Barton Parkway next to that pumping station that I showed you, that dam, building a bridge across the C&O Canal so that it wouldn't interfere with pedestrian and bike usage of the C&O Canal, then taking in barges all of the equipment and concrete removal to the Virginia shoreline across a 1,200-foot wide part of the river. So all that $2 million plus, was actually 2.2 million, was for all those expenses, a crane to lower the stuff down to the river. So when the Corps of Engineers got the money, they did it from the Virginia shoreline. So I'm leaving it at that. I think it cost about $500,000 to cut that notch and to do that. So basically the Corps got $1.5 million to pocket. But that's another story. Sorry. And this Wade, is any of you, I think a number of you probably work with Corps of Engineers, and it probably doesn't sound that unusual to a lot of you. But it was an eye opener for me. And then I wasn't even invited when they opened it up. They wouldn't invite me to the opening of it because I was objecting to a lot of the things they were doing. But at any rate.
So Jim, since there's some funny questions, this is unprompted, but you mentioned that Charlie Steck and Senator Sarbanes, U.S. Senator Sarbanes, helped you quite a bit. I wanted to give Charlie an opportunity just to say anything about that would be useful for all these other efforts out there trying to, bridge the dams. But Charlie, I'm not sure if you're in a position to take yourself off mute. If you are, please add anything, comments about how you're able to make the argument, how to pull it off.
Well, I just want to say that I've known Jim, it seems like forever, from the time that he worked at ICPRB, and he was always the source to go to on any information, actually any information what ICPRB was doing besides just fisheries. So he was a great guy to work with. And he did mention the work that we did on Little Falls Dam, and, it wouldn't have happened but for all the work that he had started prior to doing that. The other thing that was really impressive was the work that he did with kids and training kids on Shad. That is just so impressive. We followed that very, very closely over the years. So I just want to commend him for his presentation. The work, the dedication he's put in for over the years has really been an amazing leader in this area.
That's my pleasure. And I will add a little detail to that. It's because remember I talked about that pipeline mitigation money, but there was a timeline on that. If it wasn't spent by a certain time, we would lose it. And this was a time when the federal government was trying to smack the district around a little bit. And as I mentioned, funding for the Corps of Engineers unique there, and that it goes to the district budget for that project. So we were almost to the stage where the project wasn't going to get funded and we were going to lose our non-federal matching dollars. And students from Westbrook Elementary, one of the schools that started doing the Shad in their classrooms, they started in '96 and they still do it. Well, some of those students with the teacher went to the halls of Congress and gave a presentation to everybody saying, we need this fishway, you need to authorize funding. And they helped to get the thing funded. So you never know how things are going to work out, how much, the emotions of a classroom of kids banging on the door saying, we need to get this thing funded was dramatic and helpful.
Hey, so, everyone knows I love to end on time, but this is just so valuable. It's hard to do that. Let me, and it also, we are approaching the dinner hour. So what I'd like to do is end with a dinner hour type discussion, which is, about food. And so this is from the former science writer of the Washington Post for 20 years, Dave Brown. So Dave, if you want to take it, that'd be great.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And thanks for going over time for a food question here. Yeah, I'm just curious, with all of that, those tons and tons and thousands of barrels of fish, how did people eat this? Was it like salted cod, you rehydrate it and then you kind of put it in stews? And also, was it a common man's fish, or was it a real kind of a rich folks fish?
good set of questions. You're going to give me some time on this. So when it was fresh, they would do, like I showed, planking it or smoking it. A lot of the food preparation in the colonial period was done by whom? It was done by blacks. Usually they were in the kitchen working. So there's some African / Native American methods. In fact, I think that the planking is actually an African Native American style. So that's kind of eating it fresh. When it's salted, it is smoked and seasoned and put in that salt. And let me back up a little bit. And when it's to give an idea of its importance, it is sort of a common. It was every man's and woman's fish. It's in one of the first cookbooks of Virginia. And it was, I think it was a Jefferson cookbook, but I got to check that. And Washington noted when he was in Philadelphia, he wrote to Tobias Lear that, hey, I'm spending 15 shillings on shad dinner here. And, I usually sell 100 shad for 3 shillings. So he was talking about, but he was willing to pay what was then a lot of money for shad. That's, if you do the calculation, that's about $30. And George was a frugal guy. So a $30 meal for him was a good bit of money. So we know it was both a common guy, and there were people, but here's a nice story you'll like. In 1835, there's an article from the Georgetown Gazetteer about there were so many wagons, 4- and 8-horse wagons that had come to Georgetown in DC to get their fish, get their barrels of fish that blocked up the traffic. The road wasn't moving. So the very first gridlock in DC was shad-related gridlock. So it was very popular. And people came, it says in that article, they came from the confines of Ohio to get these barrels of shad. So 1835, to come from Ohio, the C&O Canal hadn't been built. That was a tough trip to get your barrels of shad. And most at the back of that time, most farmers, because most people were farmers, you had to have several barrels of smoked fish in your, root cellar to prepare for the winter. So it's very important to people. And again, it was the #1 food item going upstream. So it's, I haven't actually had much salted shad. I tried doing some one time here, but I didn't do a very good job. Most of what I like is fresh, but salted salted meat and salted fish were pretty popular at those times without refrigeration. Does that answer your question pretty good, David?
It did. Thanks a lot. Really, really interesting.
And Jim, I lied. One more question. There's a question just popped up. I really want to get to it. Okay.
I can stay here as long as anybody.
Well, I love the end on time. People know that. So I've never gone over time on these before. But
well, we have technical difficulties.
Okay. But John O. Watson, who's fisheries scientist with the Maryland Department of Natural Resources. John, if you can get yourself off mute and ask your question, that'd be good. And we'll end with that and then have last comments from Jim and a little promo for next 3 weeks. But go ahead, John O.
Yeah, hey, Jim. Great presentation. I actually was with Maryland DNR and I'm now with NOAA. But just working on fish passage issues in Maryland and DC and wondering, in your experience, what are the other low-hanging fruits for shad passage enhancement? I haven't come across many. It's just wondering if you had any dams with a target on their back that I should be made aware of.
In the Potomac, for shad, we're fine. We're the only real blockage there, and that was that main stem. So we're good with shad. For river herrings, for the blueback and alewife herrings, there are lots of opportunities for increasing, modifying some of the dams that kind of got stuck with some budget criteria. I can't name them all. I'm not that. They're Virginia and Maryland dams, non-Potomac, mostly non-Potomac ones that I know about. But those are in the Potomac area. That's the fish I would work on, is the river herrings. And then we still have quite a few up in the Anacostia and Rock Creek, I know, and those Maryland portions of those tributaries, not just the DC portions.
Great, thanks.
Jim, any last comments?
No, I'm just glad to see everybody that attended. It's nice seeing a lot of folks. Virginia Carter too. I didn't say hi to her, but and thank you all for sitting in and listening to this. I hope you learned something and it helps you in your work on shad. Again, because I'm a big proponent of increasing shad in all these other rivers, in order to get the Potomac really back to where it goes. So good luck with all of your work and all of your rivers. So thank you. And thank you for having me, Don. And
Well,
all.
Jim, congratulations on your lifetime work and congratulations on tonight. Really wonderful.
Well, thank you very much.
Wonderful,
Oh,
wonderful.